Welcome to you from wherever you are watching, and welcome to everyone watching through the Living Knowledge Network, our partnership with public libraries. The British Library, together with Faber Social, is delighted to be hosting this event with Jackie Kay and Bernardine Evaristo as they join us live to talk about one of Jackie's lifelong inspirations, the great American blues singer Bessie Smith. It's a wonderful journey of discovery captured in her newly reissued memoir and biography of the singer. We are thrilled not only to be hosting Jackie, but also Bernardine Evaristo, who many of you will know for her multiple award-winning novel, Girl, Woman, Other, her 8th book. Bernardine is also Professor of Creative Writing at Brunel University London and lifetime Vice President of the Royal Society of Literature. Our thanks go to both speakers and of course to our guest artist, the great singer and producer Nona Hendrix, who has exclusively recorded 3 Bessie Smith classics for this event. During the event, you may post your questions in the form just below the video. On this page, you can also buy books, give your feedback, or make a donation. Finally, you may add captions on the screen, simply by clicking the button. These captions are being provided live by Katie from My Clear Text, and our thanks go to her for this wonderful service. I hope you enjoy the event, and I will now pass over to Bernardine.
Well, hello everybody. Thank you, Maxime. Welcome everyone from wherever you're tuning in from, wherever in the world. I'm going to tell you how the evening's going to pan out. Jackie and I will talk for about 15 minutes about a book, 45 minutes about a book, Bessie Smith, and we'll hear some of Bessie's songs along the way, performed by Nona Hendrix. Please post your questions at any point in the form below and I'll select some at the end. To conclude the evening, we'll wrap up with the screening of Bessie's only screen role, the short film St. Louis Blues. I'm now going to introduce Jackie Kay. I have known Jackie since, I think, 1982. So we have known each other for about 40 years, and I don't think we've ever done an event before just the two of us. So this is an absolute joy to be hosting you, Jackie. It's like 40 years of our paths as writers, and every so often our paths cross, and I've watched your career and you've just had the most incredible career. So Jackie was born in Edinburgh and raised in Glasgow. She's one of Britain's best loved poets and writers. She was the 3rd Macar, and for those of you who don't know what that means she was the national poet of Scotland for 5 years until 2 weeks ago. Her writing spans poetry, novels, short fiction, children's writing, theatre, memoir, and non-fiction. She's a winner of many awards, including a CBE in 2020. Her first novel, Trumpet, won the Authors Club First Novel Award and the Guardian Fiction Prize. Her memoir, Red Dust Road, was produced by the National Theatre of Scotland. She is Professor of Creative Writing at Newcastle University and divides her time between Glasgow and Manchester, where she is currently Chancellor of the University of Salford. So, hi, Jackie.
Hi, Bernie. Hello. It's lovely. It's lovely to get this chance to talk together because, we've known each other for so long.
For so long, and we came of age in the 1980s and very much part of sort of Black women's communities. And they were certainly the making of me, and I imagine they were the making of you as well.
Absolutely, and you gave me my first writing break because you asked me to write a play, and I hadn't, when you were part of Theatre of Black Women, and I hadn't ever written a play before. Well, you asked a number of women just to write a monologue, and then you came back to me and asked me to write a whole play, and so that really that kind of started me on the road of doing things publicly with my writing right back in 1985. Chiaroscuro was on, and it recently had a revival at the Bush Theatre. But it shows you were Beth in the play.
I was indeed, yeah, and I saw the revival. It was good to see it. Yeah, the Bush, it was wonderful. So I absolutely love Bessie Smith, the book. I think the writing is terrific. You've got terrific subject matter to deal with. What I find interesting is that it's not your usual autobiography, in that it's as much about your response to her from the age of 12, which is so integrated into the book. And you establish a personal relationship with what Bessie meant and means to you as an inspiration, but you've also worked imaginatively with her story and brought it alive. I find the soaring, exhilarating writing carries us along with its narrative propulsion, insights and energy, so that we get inside Bessie's life rather than look dispassionately and critically at her. So I think it's a real treat. I think it's a gem of a book. I think it's beautiful. And I think people are just going to love finding out about her, because I didn't know most of the things that are in that book. So I was really shocked at who she was and how she led her life. It was absolutely extraordinary. And you do such service and justice to her and to her memory. So can you tell us why she was such an inspiration from the age of 12? You were growing up in Scotland in a very white community, and she became something of a role model to you.
Yeah, no, she did. I grew up in Bishopbriggs, which is in a suburb of Glasgow, just north of the city centre. And yeah, I was in a very, very suburban area. And my dad one day just brought me home this double album of Bessie Smith's Any Woman Blues. It was my first ever double album, never mind the first time I'd ever had Bessie Smith. It was my first ever double album. So that was very exciting. And then shortly after that, I liked that so much that he bought me this one as well, Nobody's Blues But Mine, which was fantastic, because like the very first album, it had a strange double-sided picture of Bessie Smith on the front cover that fascinated me. On the front cover, she looked sorrowful, and on the back cover, she was smiling. And that kind of two-sided coin, if you like, the two heads of Bessie Smith, I became fascinated by even as a child. And then I listened to the music. I played over and over and over again, these tracks, and I was fascinated by the lyrics. Like of songs like Kitchen Man, Your Frankfurters Are No So Sweet. And I never got the double entendres in these songs. I just imagined that she had a lovely man bringing her lots of food, you know, out some porch somewhere. And it was years before I kind of caught up with the double entendres, oh my ham's gonna open clams and all of that. But I loved the strange stories that the blues told, and my dad used to sing quite a lot of the blues, and so I grew up in a house of jazz and blues and of listening to Count Basie and Duke Ellington. And for my 14th birthday, I got tickets to go and see Ella Fitzgerald with my best friend at the time, Gillian Innes. So that was in a way for me, it was a way of kind of making up an imaginary Black family alongside the one that I lived with. I kind of invented Black family because they were the only Black people that I got to see. In those days, as you remember, we didn't hardly ever see any Black people in the television. You might see Yvonne Goolagong and the Nurse and the Angels. In fact, people used to stop me in the street and think that I was Yvonne Goolagong, even though I was completely different age. And people would say, "Hey, have you been in the Angels? Have you been in the Angels?" And things like that. So it's very, very strange, just trying to cobble a sense of who you are in the world and where you fit in when there's nobody around you that's in your actual life reflecting it back, apart from your brother.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it so interesting that you were into Bessie Smith from the age of 12, because I was listening to Jackson 5, David Cassidy, T-Rex, David Bowie, that kind of music, and I would never have listened to Bessie Smith, because it seems to me it's such mature music and very melancholic, really. But it struck a chord with you. Did you think that you related to her melancholia?
Yeah, I think I related to the sadness and the sassiness that was in the songs. You know, there's lots of songs about, and I'm not going to have a bit of it here, and I ain't taking it, and I ain't going to put up with it. So when you were being kind of bullied and called names, I loved those songs that were songs of revenge or refusal. And there was songs about getting your own back on your dirty, no good man. And I liked the idea that you could describe men in this way. There's 19 men living in this neighborhood. 18 of them were fools and the one ain't no doggone good. You know, at the age of 12, describing the men in my neighborhood like that was kind of completely and utterly outrageous. You know, Mr. Dunsmore, Mr. Aird, Mr. McIntosh, which one was no doggone good? So I liked the way that she kind of took the lyrics and claimed them for herself. And I had a friend that was also into blues and jazz, and so we would do these little concerts for each other, miming along to the words with our hairbrush microphone, and we'd kind of alternate between Bessie Smith and Pearl Bailey. Tired of the life I lead, tired of the blues I breed. And it was just really, really great to spend all that time with Gillian either in her box bedroom or mine with the old record player and the hairbrush, and kind of kind of perform a sense of who we might be in a way. I was also really into watching jive dancing and the dancing that came from the same era, and my dad was really into that too. So often the couch would get pushed back, and Gillian, who did the jazz dancing class, she would jive up and down the living room with my dad, and they're actually some of my happiest memories.
Interesting. And do you think that that was part of the seed of you becoming a feminist, listening to her lyrics? Because we'll talk about her life in a minute, but just in terms of that feistiness that she conveyed and outspokenness through her songs, and like you were saying, you were taking that on yourself through her music.
Yeah, I love the idea that you could stand up for yourself, and you could try to stand up for yourself, and that you could try and take control of yourself. And her songs had that struggle in them. So some of them were about that, and some of them were exactly the opposite. Some of them are about being beaten up and being able to choose if you were going to be beaten up or not. So some of the lyrics for today's ears are actually very uncomfortable. You know, a song like "Tain't Nobody's Business" starts to become quite uncomfortable as you listen to the lyrics more and more. So I wouldn't say that she was a feminist in the way that we know feminism to be now. She's certainly not a proto-feminist. She would say, I never heard of such shit, because she wouldn't articulate herself in that way. But I would say that she was a very, very strong role model in a sense, because she would defend herself and anybody that she loved. She fought off the Ku Klux Klan one time single-handedly. So she just, they came to pull the blues tent down, and everybody else got frightened, including the prop boys. And she ran out and got rid of them, and then came back in. And in order to kind of circumvent the racism of the Jim Crow South, she traveled around the place in her own Pullman train, her yellow Pullman. So as it came into town, everybody would know that Bessie Smith had arrived in town, because she wasn't going to take any more of the kind of apartheid of the South. So I think she's a very interesting character in terms of how she actually stands up for herself.
I don't think for a minute that she would have even conceived that in years to come there would be a mixed race girl growing up in Glasgow, because she never left America, did she? Who would be so inspired and so enamored of her music and her lyrics. I mean, it's just wonderful, isn't it, how music can last forever when it's of a certain quality. So in terms of your relationship to Bessie's music since your teenage years, has it been consistent, or have there been times when you have, fallen out of love with her music, or have you always loved her music, and have you always played it?
I've always loved it, and I've always played it. I mean, I think there's a handful of people that you keep turning to in your life, and as you get older, they get older with you, or they change with you, and you hear completely different things. So she's a kind of a bedrock person for me. There's certain people that are like that. Nina Simone's another, Joni Mitchell's another. There's just certain people that you just do keep. They don't age. You don't lose interest in them. You find their lyrics and what it is that they have to say endlessly fascinating. So yeah, Bessie's somebody that I've always returned to again and again, and written about quite a lot in different ways. I wrote a play about her, every bit of it, a number of years ago, and I wrote a series of poems about her. I think she might have found it very funny, me talking about her now. Here we are in 2020, and we're very far away from anywhere that she would have been. But on the other hand, there's a kind of ancestry, there's a kind of ancestral voice that musicians have, where they consistently pass the baton down. And that doesn't mean just to other musicians like Nina Simone, say, and then passing it down to Celeste, but it's also to other artistic people, other artists, other writers. And I find that whole period of the Harlem Renaissance totally and utterly fascinating, the kind of period when she would have been around in Harlem. And I think if I had a chance to choose a period to be around in, it would have been the Harlem of the 1920s and the late 1920s, really.
Absolutely.
So it's just a fascinating time.
Yes, absolutely. You mentioned Nina Simone. I think I love Nina Simone, and her music touches my heart. Her voice touches my heart, and it always has done, and it always will do. And it's something that I just think it's there. And it's also the memory of what she meant to me when I was a very young woman, so I totally get how this relationship with Bessie has been consistent. So in terms of writing the book, what research did you do? And obviously this was first published 97, so you wrote it in the mid 90s. And what surprises did you discover about her?
Well, it was interesting because I was writing my novel Trumpet, and then Nick Drake came along and he asked me if I would pick a gay icon and write about them. And I was having difficulty with Trumpet of getting the voice of it right. So I stopped writing Trumpet and decided to write Bessie, and to pick Bessie because I knew that she'd had a number of relationships with different women on the road, and I'd always been fascinated by her bisexuality, by her relationships with women, and I wanted to explore that more because there weren't that many figures, Black lesbian or Black bisexual figures at all in the culture. So I just started immersing myself, reading lots and lots of jazz biographies at the time, blues biographies by lots of other people that knew her. I immersed myself in all of her recordings. I went to the library in Washington and I looked at old film that Zora Neale Hurston had taken around the same time, because she was fascinated by children and the games that they played. And Bessie grew up in Chattanooga and was very poor, grew up in a ramshackle cabin, as she described it later, where the rats outnumbered the children. And I became fascinated by what kind of games she would have played, what kind of songs she would have heard, what she would have listened to on the street corner, because she started as a girl singing on the street corner. And then I just read just about every blues book that you could imagine, and there are so many of them, kind of scouring them for any reference to Bessie at all, and cobbled all sorts really together from all of that different research. But the main thing that really powered the book wasn't really the research, and wasn't finding out about when she played where, and when she was on the road to where, when she toured this, and when she met Ma Rainey and all of that, when she met Jack G. It was actually it was trying to conjure up imaginatively. That was the most exciting and interesting thing for me to try and do, to try and get right inside her, because I realized that we only had a certain kind of access to her, because some of the access had been actually deliberately destroyed. And there's only one piece of film that we're going to see later where we hear her sing. So we don't have film footage of her. There's all sorts of things that are missing. And I became fascinated by that, by what was missing, and how to try and find a way to create the space for her to kind of live and breathe again through my imagination, through my love of her.
Which you do so beautifully, yes. So now we're going to hear the first song by Nona Hendryx, and it is Nobody Knows When You're Down and Out. It was recorded by Bessie in 1929 and is possibly her best known track. Nona Hendryx is a legendary American vocalist, record producer, songwriter, musician, author. She's a founding member of Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells, and later of the iconic group LaBelle, who racked up 3 gold albums and the worldwide 1975 hit Lady Marmalade. Her solo career has included 8 studio albums and collaborations with the likes of Prince, Peter Gabriel, and Talking Heads, achieving several top 10 hits and a Grammy nomination.
Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out. A song that, for the time, I think it was really so powerful. Nobody knows you when you're down and out. Even family would not know you when you're down and out, when you're in need. And this is the song that I think epitomizes that. Nobody knows you when you're down and out. Nobody loves you when you're down and out. Nobody needs you when you're down and out. How Bessie must have felt when they didn't want her anymore, when her music was not popular anymore. Once I lived the life of a millionaire, spending my money like I didn't care, taking my friends out for a good time, drinking bootleg whiskey, champagne and wine. Then I began to fall so low. Lost all my friends, didn't have nowhere to go. If I get my hands on a dollar again, I'm gonna hang on until that eagle grins. Nobody loves you. Well, when you're down and out, in my pocket, not a penny, and my friends, I don't have any. Well, just as soon as you get back on your feet again, here they come saying they're your long lost friend. I said it's mighty strange, but without a doubt, nobody knows you. No, nobody knows you. No, nobody needs you. Nobody knows you. Nobody loves you when you. No, nobody loves you. Nobody knows you. Oh, when you're down and when you're down and nobody loves you when you're down and out.
That was a wonderful performance. So it's interesting because you write about the end of Bessie's life and what happened to her and her downfall, if you like. But for most of her life, or most of her professional career, she was, she was a rich superstar. She had her own train that she traveled around the country in, because obviously traveling around America at that time in the 1920s, probably early 30s, was difficult for Black performers. She was a larger than life figure. She was epic. She had a retinue, and she could be kind to them, but she could also be very cruel to them. She was sexually free, shall we say, and was having lots of sexual engagements. And you talk about something called a buffet clubs, which I had to look up because I was like, what is that? So she was wild, really. She was wild. She was out of control. She was incredibly generous and didn't think about the future in terms of our finances. So you had all this material to work with. How did you make decisions about what you were going to put into the book and how?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it's always an interesting question, isn't it? When you write, as you know yourself, deciding what not to say is just about as important as deciding what to say. I just really wanted to give a sense of the dramatic arc of her life, because her life does have Shakespearean dimensions, and we are all fascinated by lives that contain tragedy, and lives that go from poor to rich and back to poor. We're fascinated, even people that have never been rich are fascinated by that idea of that arc. I remember when my dad used to sing "Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out," he used to really relish the words, even though he'd grown up in working class Glasgow. And that song really follows the idea of people being sometime-ish, of liking you when you've got money and not liking you when you don't have money. And that was exactly true for Bessie. I mean, she bought her sisters, Viola and Tinny, a whole house. She moved them up to live with her in Philadelphia. She bought Jack G numerous cars because he liked cars. And she only really had a period of about 9 years where she was actually very, very wealthy. And before that, she had trouble even getting recorded, and it was a slog going around and doing all the recordings and everything. But from the minute that her first record really sold 780,000 copies, she was on the road. And even though she was massively ripped off by all of the people that she was involved with, her managers and her own night watch, her husband, she was the richest Black woman in America at one stage, and as you say, Bernie, rich enough to own her own train and to take control of her own transport. So, but then the Wall Street crash happened in 1929. The blues went out of fashion. Jazz came in, and she crashed. And not that long before her death, she was really, really struggling again. And there wasn't a single well-known person that came to her funeral when she died, although tens of thousands of Black people lined the streets and tried to see her. They had to move her body. There were so many people wanting in to see her. So many ordinary people actually identified with the Empress of the Blues. And for them, she told their story as well as her own.
Yeah, it's sad, isn't it? It's so interesting when you look back at the 20th century and what happened to the great talent there and how different it would be today. And also, she probably didn't really understand herself. You know, she was traumatized, wasn't she, by her childhood, and her both parents had died by the age of 9, and that gave her probably the voice that she had, or something that was in the voice that spoke to people. But she was a functioning alcoholic, wasn't she? And she was in a really abusive relationship with Jack G, and she was also violent herself to people. So it's like there were so many, what we would say today would be so many unresolved issues. You know, she needed to go on Oprah, didn't she? And to sit down and, you know, have a good old talking to with Oprah about her life.
I'm not sure going on Oprah would have helped. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the sensation? But yes, she had so many different issues, and it is really interesting to find somebody that's had a lot of violence in their life. She had a lot of relationships with very, very violent men, Jack G being the worst of them. I mean, he would throw her down the stairs just before she had to go on and sing. You know, there were people that would try and defend her, and he would beat them up too. He was a very, very violent man, and she stayed with him for 6 years. And he was, by all accounts, by everybody that you read from the time giving these personal statements about him, was absolutely terrifying. But Bessie herself beat up Ruby Walker once, and she beat up a couple of the women that she was with. And one time she tried to shoot Jack G from a moving train, you know, with her gun out of the window trying to shoot him. And another time she went straight down to the hotel room, having heard that he was having an affair. And there was apparently blood, guts, feathers everywhere. So yeah, she lived so much of her life through her emotions, really, and through her love of song. But she hated what she called dicty Blacks, and she hated middle class Black people. And so when she went to these kind of Harlem parties that were held by upper class people that were artists or people that were into the Harlem Renaissance, like Carl Van Vechten, she would feel completely out of place, and she'd have to just drink lots and lots of gin before she could get into it. And at one point she kind of just knocked down the tiny wife of Carl Van Vechten, who came up and tried to kiss her in the cheek and kind of patronize her. And she said, "I ain't never heard of such shit," and sort of knocked her down. So she is a fascinating character, because she couldn't stand people being duplicitous, or people speaking falsely. She felt that it was her business to speak the truth, and she spoke the truth in all sorts of different ways. But yeah, I find her endlessly fascinating, because we always think that if you've had violence done to you, then you wouldn't then be violent. But and then we actually know that that's not the case, that there are cycles of violence that happen, and people always ask women that have stayed in relationships with very violent men why they did it. But I think the question should be the other way around. You know, why did the man who was being bought cars and sent to spas and given everything he needed, why was he so violent? Why don't we spend our time focusing on the male behavior and ask ourselves how that could change? And living through this week, in the last few weeks, last few months, last few years, living through my life, I've been actually asking that question a lot. You know, why we don't ask that question more of men.
And also in terms of her career, she wasn't looked after by her recording company. And I think we hear those stories happening today, but artists today, they're so much more savvy, aren't they? So for example, she was ripped off by, she didn't get royalties and so on. And, but there was a naivety, wasn't there, to being in the profession, even though she was at the top. She didn't really understand the system because the system wasn't there to really support her. It was there to exploit her. And of course that served her well for a while. We're now going to hear the second song by Nona Hendryx, and it's called Moan You Moaners.
She was so focused on her joie de vivre that she did not even, come back that way, trying to get back into the spiritual place that maybe I think might have been the driving energy in her voice and in her music. But this to me is Bessie Smith's nod to gospel. It's a song that I could hear Mahalia Jackson singing, Clara Ward, any of the sort of singers of that era who was doing gospel. And I feel that this is where the energy for Bessie actually comes from, that it comes out of that kind of spiritual place. Although she was focused on her, strong woman, I do what I want to do, take no nobody's business if I do, my man, my life, I do what I want to do, and nobody's going to stop me. But this, she talks about going to meet your maker, whether it be God or down below.
Sisters and brothers, we meet here on some serious business. There seems to be some backbiting going on. And the thing I want to know is who's been doing it. It's a shame. It's a shame. It's a shame. The thing I want to know is what bit me on who bit me on my back? That's what I want to know. Hear ye sinners, hear my call. Satan's waiting on you all. Better get your story right. Better see the light. Fire burning down below. If you ain't right, down you go to original hot brimstone. Let you down into moan. You better get down on your knees and let the good Lord hear your pleas, or else you're gonna rest with ease. Moan, you moaners. Yes, in your head, way down and pray to the devil, chase away, and let your soul be saved today. And moan, you moaners, singing hallelujah, blood of the Lamb. Let your voices rise. Hear me talking to you, ain't got no time to sham. Everybody gets to paradise. You must repent without a doubt, and let the good Lord hear you shout. Oh yeah, religion turns you inside out. And moan, you moaners, you better get down on your knees and let the good Lord hear you plead. Oh yeah, or else you wanna rest with ease. Moan, you moaners. Yes, in your head way down and pray to have the devil chase and let your soul be saved today. Moan, you moaners, singing hallelujah, blood of the Lamb, let your voices rise. Hear me talking to you, ain't got no time for sham. Everybody gets to paradise. Oh, repent without a doubt, and let the good Lord hear you shout. Religion turns you inside out, and moan, you moaners.
Well, that was another amazing song. Jackie, you're a poet and you create music through words, and you've been doing this since I first met you in 1982. I've always known you as a poet, and a brilliant poet, and a very natural poet. You know, there's never anything forced about the way you use language, and I love that about your work. But what you do with this book is that you find so many different ways to describe Bessie's voice and all the different levels of meaning and emotion within her voice. And you relate it to how it was received, you know, back in her day, but also what is carried through to the present day. And I think that's a real feat with the book. I couldn't do that, I don't think, because I just don't have the facility to find so many different ways to describe someone's voice, and with each description you're adding another layer of meaning. And I think it's really magical the way you do that. So can you tell us how you captured her voice, and whether it meant listening to her music and then writing as you were listening to her music, whether it's just in you anyway, you know, whether you had to re-engage with the music in a certain way so that you could write about the voice?
Oh, thank you for saying that. That's lovely. I don't know. The answer to that question is I'm not quite sure how you go about doing something. All I know is that I found her voice endlessly fascinating, and I did listen to it over and over and over and over again. And I also listened to all the blues women of the time over and over again, because there was a number of women, actually, Clara Smith, Trixie Smith, Mammy Smith, all with second names of Smith as well, that sang around that time, and trying to distinguish between their voices, to get to why Bessie Smith was so brilliant, why I thought she was better than the others. And in the end, I decided that she had this quality to her voice that was a kind of raw, unplugged voice, that it spoke to something in me. It kind of dragged you down, right down to the depths of yourself, and it made you feel intimately known. And it did that thing that a book can do. If you're reading a book that you really, really love, you kind of think to yourself, how does this writer know this about me? It becomes a relationship that you have just yourself with the writer. And I had that relationship with Bessie and her voice. It became just me and her in a way. So it was very private to me, as well as it being a public thing, of course, because it's an album and it's something that anybody can listen to, anybody can access. Although at that time, really not that many people were listening to her, because she went out of fashion for a very, very long time. I'm hoping that many more people will come back to listening to Bessie now, with lots of things happening like Ma Rainey's Black Bottom and the new documentaries about Billie Holiday. And I'm hoping that there's suddenly going to be a huge revival in the blues and jazz women. But yes, just to try and describe a voice is quite hard. It's like trying to describe a musical instrument. It's really, really hard to try and do it, and so you just have to keep on. It's a bit like, it's a puzzle. It's a bit like, I mean, you're probably right to compare to start that conversation with poetry, because it's a bit like when you're trying to find an image, the right image in a poem, and it can take you ages and ages to find it, but when you have found it, you kind of have this little ping moment where you think, that's it. And I quite like that struggle that goes into writing, and then also to try and do it in a way that seems artless. I remember reading that Toni Morrison said that a reader should never be able to see the writer sweat, which I kind of liked. I like the idea of that. So I like the idea that the struggle to try and find her voice and bring that voice to life, although it was difficult, hopefully doesn't seem it.
And was it a challenging prospect writing this book? When you embarked on it, did you think, how am I going to do this? Or did you just start it and then somehow the book emerged?
Yeah, I just started it with my imaginary version of her voice, of her standing in the corner. So there are these parts of the book that are sort of lyrical parts where I'm just trying to create how I think she might have talked as a kid, what she would have said, what would have been going on in her mind. And once I had that kind of imaginary wee 9-year-old Bessie on Chattanooga at the street corner singing and getting her nickels and her dimes, then the book was away in a sense. So it was that's why I really think it's always difficult if you're teaching writing. It's that kind of spark that can't really be taught, the imaginative spark. But you know when you have it, when you get the two flints together, you get the stones, and you have a little fire going. And so that was it. It was finding a way of recreating that young person and then growing up with her, and just trying to track her through her life, right to the very end of her life, right to her very, very tragic death.
And so why didn't you write it as, say, poems, some kind of maybe verse fiction or a novel or short stories? Why did you choose basically, I mean, it's a bit of a hybrid form because there is sort of fictionalization in there, but why did you choose that form, basically nonfiction, creative nonfiction?
I chose that form because that was a form that when Nick came up and asked me to write, he wanted to pick a gay icon and to write a piece of nonfiction, which I hadn't really done before. And I first said to him, no, I can't do it because I can't. I'm not a nonfiction writer. I'm not a biographer. I can't think of how I could do it. So I actually said no to him about 3 times, and he just kept persisting. And then I thought, well, actually, there is somebody that I've always wanted to write about, and that's Bessie Smith. So why don't I give it a go? And I said to him, I'll give it a go under the proviso that if I finish the book and I'm not happy with it, then I've got to be able to get out of it. So we went along with it on that basis. And that was quite a good basis to go along with it, that I might just bail out at any point. But I became utterly fascinated by her life and learning about it in more and more depth. And also writing Bessie, suddenly when I returned to trumpet, it solved the problem of trumpet, which was strange. So having immersed myself in all that blues and all that jazz non-stop for months on end kind of made me realize that trumpet itself had to be the solution to that novel was music, that each person that appears for a moment appears like a solo. And if I could give the whole book a musical structure, the structure of a piece of music, then the book kind of sprung to life. So Bessie really helped me out with them both.
Very, very interesting. Trumpet's an amazing book. People should go out and buy that book. It's a great novel.
Thank you.
So we're going to hear another song, and it's Taint Nobody's Taint. That sounds so English, don't it? Taint Nobody's Business If I Do, sung by Nona Hendrix, and it's an early song from 1923.
This song really is about a woman who is her own woman and wants to stand up for herself in every way. With her man, with her community, with her family, with her friends, and say, I do what I want to do. It's all on me. If I make a mistake, it's my mistake, and I own my mistakes. That is what tain't nobody's business, what I do means to me. There is nothing I can say. It just ain't your business. There ain't nothing I can do, nothing I can say that folks won't criticize. Anyway.
Ain't nobody's business if I do. Well, I'd rather my man didn't hit me. Oh, but if he did, the judge would acquit me. Ain't nobody's business if I do. I swear I won't call no copper. I'm never gonna be beat up by my papa. Ain't nobody's business what we do. Ooh, if I take a notion to jump right into the ocean, ain't nobody's business what I do. No, 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 no. Ain't nobody's business. No, 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 nobody's business. Ain't nobody's business what I do. No, no, ain't nobody's business what I do. Yeah.
So yeah, wonderful again. So I want to talk, Jackie, about colorism or shadism, which you also mention in the book. And that is, for those who don't know, it's the hierarchy of color. And it's the hierarchy of color which positions whiteness at the top and very dark-skinned Black people at the bottom. And it's something that's prevalent in Black societies. And it is where people who are darker skinned just get a rougher ride in so many ways. And Bessie Smith got a really rough ride because she was a darker skinned Black woman. And you talk about that. You actually reference Woody Allen, which I love, and saying that it's very hard to get a Black person or a dark skinned Black person in his films. And I totally agree with that. And it's something that we don't really talk about much. It's something that there's a taboo around discussing it. So how you present as a person of color or a Black person depends on the shade of your skin as much as the darkness, you know, the shade of your skin as much as the fact that you're Black anyway, if I'm making sense. You know, if you're lighter skinned, you're going to be treated differently. And so she had to deal with that, and that affected her career and it also affected her relationships. Do you want to tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Where do you begin? Because in the America that she was from, South Africa actually copied its system of apartheid from the American South, and the American South, as we know, was completely obsessed with color, even down to having all these terms: quadroon, octoroon. You know, even in some writer like William Faulkner in Light of August, he'll have the black blood and the white blood, and he'll say the black blood made him pick up the gun, the white blood made him put it back down, the black blood made him walk to the door, the white blood made him, and so on. So this obsession with not just people, not just the darkness of the skin, but with the idea that the black blood in you of any sort, any amount, is equated with badness, with violence, and with brutality, is something that is in the American psyche and imagination, and it's filtered through in so many different ways. And racism generally has filtered through from the days of slavery and beyond in so many different ways, and infected and diseased and made toxic our entire world. And we're still living the consequences of that kind of toxicity. For Bessie, she was actually turned down when she went for her first audition because they decided that she was too black, too dark, and they wanted what they called, high yellow, or what Toni Morrison would have called a high yellow dream girl. And so she developed a real sense of hurt about that, and a suspicion of lighter skinned Black people, because lighter skinned Black people, she'd think, were not trustworthy. And she often had middle-class Black people didn't like Bessie Smith. They thought that she brought the whole race down. So she'd attend these parties in Harlem and people would kind of turn their nose up at her. And they didn't like the blues either. They were taught not to like the blues, the middle-class Black people, because they decided that the blues were no good and were embarrassing to them. So that's really kind of fascinating, the class differences between Black people, as well as colorism. You've got the whole issue of class and what that brings. These kind of divisions and that kind of the ways of dividing one lighter skinned person to a darker skinned person is really heinous. And I remember, my mum used to sing that song, if you're brown, stick around, but if you're Black, oh brother, get back. If you're white, you're all right. If you're brown, stick around, but if you're Black, oh brother, get back. She used to sing this to me when I was a wee girl. I didn't know what she was on about at first, and then I realised that it was an ironic song, and that she was telling me about this kind of terrible system, hypocrisy really, that's existed. But if you're from Glasgow and you're my colour, you're actually very dark. But then the minute I go to Nigeria, I'm white practically. People will stop you and sort of say, and you'll really stand out. And so it's very interesting, and you'll know this yourself, just trying to, and you've written lots about it as well, and Bernie, brilliantly, but it's very interesting trying to work out what that means to be mixed race. In fact, you've written about how to kind of embrace, and how long it took you to embrace the term mixed race after years of kind of pushing it away. Because when we grew up in the late 80s, we actually were, in the late 70s and early 80s, we were embracing the term Black as a political term. And now that even the language that we use to describe ourselves has changed.
Absolutely. It's so much more nuanced than I think sometimes people realize. And she definitely was a victim of that. And it's even more amazing that somebody such as herself and Ma Rainey and actually some of the other blues singers did so well, considering they had that as a barrier that they had to get over. So I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to look at some of the questions that have come in. So the final question is, how does it feel to be publishing this book today, in today's culture, which is different to 1997? All sorts of things are happening now that weren't happening then, and definitely weren't happening when we were young women in the 80s, and really feeling like outsiders in so many ways.
It feels great to be publishing it today. I mean, Alexa from Faber just read. She found an old copy of Bessie in a secondhand store probably, and read it and loved it, and just approached me a couple of years ago and said that she'd like to reprint it, which was just sort of amazing. And I wasn't expecting that at all. I just thought that it'd been published once before. It didn't do that well. Hardly, didn't think it even got any reviews, didn't get any attention. So it's very interesting how books have their moment. Every book has their moment, and these particular times that we're living in are alive and attuned to listening out for how our society and our structures and our institutions and our personal relationships are affected by the toxicity that is racism. So last year, with the kind of eruption of the Black Lives Matter movement, with the particular death of George Floyd, there was lots of people marching in the streets, not just Black people, but white people too. And it was like suddenly everybody woke up, and there's been so many different deaths in police custody over so many different years. But this death particularly triggered people because they were able to watch 9.5 minutes in real time, and we have the case now going on right now as we speak. So that was one of those moments, and we live through moments, changing moments that change our time. And sometimes there are books right there, or records there, or pieces of art there that also, for people in some way or another, articulate the time. And so I think that Bessie has fed into this time just by chance, really, in a strange way, because I've always been me. I've always been interested in Bessie, and I wrote the book over 20 years ago. So there's nothing fashionable about it. We've always been women interested in race and feminism and politics, and trying to work these things out. It just so happens that lots of other people are interested in those things now too.
And also there's an interest in recovering history and also honouring people who went before us. And I think in a way that hasn't happened on the scale previously. So I think that's also very interesting. So whereas for myself, I'm like, well, of course, everybody knows about Bessie Smith, but actually they probably don't. You know, the younger people, a lot of them probably won't know about her simply because she's not around. But hopefully your book will change that. So this is a really good question from, can't read the name. Oh, Tonia, somebody called Tonia. And she says, if you had the opportunity to meet Bessie, what would you ask her?
Oh, well, that I would probably ask her about her adopted son, Jack G, because she adopted Jack G, and then Jack G Senior came and took him away just out of spite and put him into an orphanage, having been taken out of being in that kind of a situation. And so I would have asked her what she'd done to try and find him, and what that had been like, that experience for her, at the risk of upsetting her, because I know it would upset her, and I know she was brokenhearted. But I'm really curious to know about what that experience was like for her, because first of all, it gave her enormous pride being a mother and cooking and trying to have an ordinary life, trying to get out of the kind of alcoholic cycle of her life of pig, sweet and gin. And then this normalcy really was taken from her by this very vindictive man. And I think for every woman who's had men who use their own children to try and get to their hearts, I think that's a question that would be interesting for so many people that experience that. So I'd probably ask her something like that.
Yeah. Okay, so the second question is from Melanie McCaunch, and she asks, she says, wonderful event, so many parallels to the life of Billie Holiday a generation later. So sad. Why do you think that was?
Well, it's interesting, because Bessie Smith made her last recording on practically the same day that Billie Holiday made her first in the same studio. So, I can't imagine a more sort of direct passing of the baton. And one time Billie Holiday got food poisoning, and Bessie Smith was her understudy, if you like. She stood in for her. By that time, Bessie had lost popularity, and she had to go and just help Billie out when she got food poisoning. So the synchronicity between their lives is really interesting. So too is the fact that Billie Holiday was outspoken, and that Strange Fruit became her song, although when she was first asked to sing Strange Fruit, she refused, because she'd seen lynchings and she'd seen so many people get upset, and she didn't want to sing a song that was political initially, so-called political. She turned it down. Lewis Allen, that wrote that original lyric, was turned down, and then she took that song on, and it became her anthem song, in the way that Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out was Bessie's. So there's so many similarities between the two of them. I mean, your question is, why were their lives so sad? And that's, their lives were sad because one, people didn't really know how to cope with fame. They still don't. We still have lives of people who, once they become famous, their lives become ruined, from Amy Winehouse and beyond. We have people from our time now having that same thing, where the equivalent of, social media can ruin their lives. Well, in Bessie's time and in Billie's time, they had the same kind of thing, not social media, but the media and people that didn't give them a chance to have any kind of privacy, and they didn't really know quite how to cope with that, to go from being completely unknown and completely poor to suddenly being rocketed, and nobody teaches you how to deal with these things. So I think that's one big thing, but also very violent men, and also people that abused them, that didn't treat them fairly in the music business, in the music industry. And we have lots of people that's happened to, from Tina Turner to Nina Simone. Black women in the music industry have not been treated well since Dot. So there's so many different reasons, and altogether, when you put all of these things together, it becomes complex. The question really should be, how could they be so happy? Because actually an awful lot of the time they were huge fun, and there was a lot of happiness and a lot of joy in Bessie Smith. So, and the blues themselves have a lot of humor in them. If you listen to them, even the accompaniment to them is kind of tongue in cheek and funny. So yeah, I think that when we talk about the blues, we think blues means just sad, but it doesn't. It's so complex.
Mm-hmm. So this is a question from Katrina Slorak. How important was it to discover that Bessie loved women?
Oh, well, it was really, really amazingly important for me personally, because I remember actually the first time I read anything about Bessie Smith, my friend Gillian, I used to pretend, we'd sing these songs together, and she got hold of a book about Bessie. It must have been actually Chris Albertson's book about Bessie. But I read this part in the book that said that she went around and had sex with women in her Pullman. I didn't know what a Pullman was properly then. I thought it was a wagon, like the kind of wagons on the Orient Express. So I imagined her in some sort of wagon having sex with this woman called Ruby. And at that time, around about 14, 15, when I read that particular part of the book, I was thinking that I was a lesbian myself, and it was really quite exciting to come across this Black American woman who had relationships with women, because you didn't really know if there were any other Black women in the world that had relationships with women. You didn't hear about many, you didn't see any, and at one point I thought I might be the only Black lesbian in the world. And I remember around that time, when just a few years later, in my art class, this class bully went, Miss, Jackie isn't lazy. And the art teacher, to my huge astonishment, turned around and said, well, are you, Jacqueline? Are you a lesbian? And I said, I don't know. I really don't know. And it was one of these kind of moments that it was kind of electrifying, because for some reason your own sexuality was terrifying at the time. There was just a lot of judgment and a lot of fear. So yes, it was just important. It's important to discover people that have similar experiences, and it continues to be important. Really, it was really important to come across Audre Lorde a few years later and to find everything that she had to say about her sexuality. It was very exciting to find Angela Davis and to find that she'd had relationships with women. So it's I think having role models allows you to have a chance to know that you yourself could be possible or might be possible.
And what I think is interesting about the book is that she didn't hide her relationships with women. Mm-hmm. She kissed women in public and so on. And that just seems so shocking for that time, 100 years ago. It's quite incredible. So this is a question from Sarah Jane Roberts. Beautiful and inspiring event. Thank you, Jackie and Bernie. Are there any contemporary artists that you think hold a flame to Bessie in terms of vocals, music, or originality?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. I'm really glad that you're enjoying it, and I'm glad that I'm glad that you just said that, Bernie, about her not hiding. If I can just pick up on that for a second, because I find it fascinating that we're exactly 100 years on from the 1920s of America. We're now in 2021, so exactly 100 years ago, when she would have been kind of coming up to her heyday, and in those days people were very openly gay. There was openly gay relationships in the Buffet flats and whatever. Ma Rainey had lesbianism in her blues song, Prove It On Me. And I find that really kind of fascinating, and also sort of a bit depressing as to how the clock has turned back for quite a long time, and to all the different discussions that we're still having around race and sexuality. But to this question now, there's so many different musicians, because I love the fact that music just keeps changing. It just keeps changing, and who you love keeps on changing, and the ways in which people interpret the blues keeps on changing. So, I mean, I really love a singer, for instance, like Peggy Seeger, who's now in her 80s and has just released a new album, but sings the blues. And I first came across her in 1979. But she sings extraordinary blues songs that are her own blues. I love Celeste. who I think is a really phenomenal singer because of the way that she matches up or mixes up the form. I love Laura Mvula because she does such a lot of different things. Anyway, the list is long and endless. I love actually listening to jazz record requests and programs like that on the radio, because I always come across new singers that I don't know anything about, and then I have to go and look them up, and I find that really, really fascinating. I love, say, watching Joni Mitchell's 70th birthday party, which, you know, you just see this endless stream of musicians, people that you know and people that you don't know, but they all do amazing Joni Mitchell covers, and that's kind of fantastic as well, to see people do different versions of songs, as it was to hear Nona there, to take 3 Bessie songs and to make of them her own, and they're completely different to the way that Bessie would have sang them. She puts a completely different spin in it, but that is the wonderful world of music, that it keeps on changing and evolving, and it keeps on finding new familiars and old ancestors.
Nice way to end the conversation, Jackie. This has been such a treat talking to you. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a treat. Thank you so much, Rani. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's been wonderful. Just to say to the audience that there is a tab at the top of the screen, and you can buy Jackie's books through that tab. So please do take a look at that. So, but we're going to say goodbye now. So thank you so much again for tuning in, and Jackie for being absolutely amazing.